The release of Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy in December 2001 was meant to be a turning of the page for Naughty Dog. They had left Universal Interactive and Crash Bandicoot behind and became a subsidiary of Sony in order to remain secure in the rapidly changing games industry. But little did they realize that the market had begun to shift dramatically in the 2 years between Crash Team Racing and Jak and Daxter, leading to their new dynamic duo underperforming compared to their former marsupial mascot. The tide had begun to shift, but Naughty Dog was ready to move with the current. However, rather than abandoning all of the hard work put into Jak and Daxter, they decided to bring them along for the ride. Just like the players the team were trying to covet, Jak was ready to grow up. While the PlayStation 2 may have been released in 2000, the next generation wouldn't truly arrive until the following year. 2001 would not just see the release of Nintendo's GameCube and Microsoft's Xbox, but a whole host of games which would set the stage for the medium's shift in focus. The financial and critical success of titles like Devil May Cry, Max Payne, Halo, and especially Grand Theft Auto 3 signified that the appetite for more mature experiences had reached new heights. Players were getting older, and their taste in games reflected that. It was in this market that Naughty Dog had been developing Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, which saw unanimous critical praise, over 1 million units sold, and 1.2 million units shipped within its first 3 months on store shelves. While it did well commercially, its success was modest compared to Crash, whose third game alone shipped nearly 3 million copies worldwide in its first 4 months, just a few years earlier. Nobody was ignorant to why. Everyone at Naughty Dog could plainly see that the market was in a state of transition. Jason Rubin acknowledged all of this himself at the 2002 DICE Summit shortly after the game's release, where he discussed where the market was heading and how that shift affected Jak and Daxter.
Amy Blair, who's my marketing director, did an interview with a couple seven-year-olds about Jak and Daxter. Like, it's a great game, we had a lot of fun playing it, but I think it's targeted at a younger audience. It was 7-year-olds. 7-year-olds. Who's it targeted at? Barney age? They can't use controllers. But those kids now want to act older, and they've been given the opportunity. And guess what? They're buying those games. So it may be that even though the age comes down this generation, the market doesn't come with it. And that's a very, very fundamental change. And it may mean that Jak and Daxter 2 and Jak and Daxter 3 won't be mass market. Grand Theft Auto 4, maybe. So that's a very, very big change.
While his comment about follow-ups to the Precursor Legacy suggested an unsureness about their market viability, work on the sequel was already well underway. Shortly after the first game's completion, the team headed up to the ski lodges in Mammoth, California, both to decompress from a long and stressful development cycle and to discuss Jak and Daxter's future. It was a strange position to be in, as the past several years of Naughty Dog's existence and success had been driven by filling holes in the market by iterating on existing genres. Way of the Warrior was the first fighting game on the 3DO, and Crash Bandicoot, in addition to being developed for the wild card that was the PlayStation, took the traditional 2D mascot platformer and turned the camera 90 degrees. Because Crash captured the market so effectively, they could not only afford to stick with the same basic formula for its sequels, but it was in their best interest to stay the course. Jak and Daxter followed the same basic blueprint. It took the established design of games like Super Mario 64 and Spyro the Dragon, and broke down the barriers between levels. Their approach was still sound, but the market changed by the time the game was finished. And because 3D platforming collectathons now had a certain G-rated stigma attached to them, the team felt that the genre had begun to grow stale, thanks to the 1-2 punch of core players moving away from them, and a lack of innovation. But most of all, what they felt was holding back the genre, and Jak by extension, was its general simplicity. Narratives and motivations tended to be uncomplicated, excuses to get the player to jump around and fetch various trinkets. Even with stellar controls and level design, if players weren't being engaged on an emotional or intellectual level, if there was nothing to keep everything at least a little bit grounded, they would be more likely to bounce off. This became the foremost concern when developing the next chapter in the Jak and Daxter saga, to engage players through a compelling narrative, themes, and characters, while retaining the strong gameplay, level design, and technical foundation of the original. While this wasn't unfeasible to achieve within the confines of what had already been established in the first game, those who had dismissed or fell off of it would be unlikely to give the sequel a chance. In fact, Jason Rubin had considered scrapping Jak and Daxter altogether to build something new with what they had already made, something that wouldn't have the baggage that came with being a sequel, and could stand on its own in the maturing market. But when he brought the idea back to Sony Computer Entertainment America Vice President Shuhei Yoshida, it was shot down. Yoshida agreed that the market had shifted, but maintained that the PlayStation brand needed to appeal to players both young and old. Moreover, Sony had invested millions into Jak and Daxter, and they wanted the series to continue. After taking a bit of time to assess how players felt about the first game, the team made the decision to scrap the original setting, wiping the slate clean to give the dynamic duo as much of a fresh start as possible. In its place, inspired by the freedom that came with Grand Theft Auto 3's city environment and sandbox-style gameplay, they would create their own city for Jak and Daxter to explore on the back of the systems they had already created. Not everybody liked the prospect of giving Jak a gun and letting him carjack civilians. Some would take to calling the project Jak Theft Auto, with varying degrees of affection and derision. However, according to artist Rob Adams, those who had doubts were far outnumbered by those who supported the new direction. But the stylistic shift for Jak and Daxter 2 would also be accompanied by changes to Naughty Dog's lateral structure and scheduling. Aside from Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin, everyone else within the company was free of any sort of hierarchy, even as their numbers grew into the 30s during the Precursor Legacy. Artists would report to Rubin while programmers checked in with Gavin. But as the sequel entered development and the team began to steadily grow in accordance with the team's ambitions, this structure became untenable. Certain staff would be appointed as leads for certain departments. Stephen White would formally be made the studio's lead programmer. The character modeling team would be led by Rob Titus. Josh Scher, who spearheaded cutscenes on the first game, was officially promoted to lead animator thanks to his organizational skills. And new mandates to have all team members on site during specific hours would ensure that everybody would be able to work with each other in person at least some of the time, while still offering personal flexibility. There were a few departures between the first and second games, including animator John Kim, who had led the charge on much of the first game's gameplay animation. But there were two particular new additions to the studio who proved to be invaluable. The first was French programmer Christophe Balestra, whose no-nonsense demeanor and time working in the Atari ST demo scene made him an indispensable talent, able to efficiently rewrite code and even wrap his head around Andy Gavin's notoriously opaque Goal programming language after only a single week. He would even become something of a legend among his colleagues for refusing to show Jason Rubin his code until it was finished. The second was Japanese designer Hirokazu Yasuhara, one of the founding members of Sega's Sonic team, who had not only been heavily involved in the development of the first Sonic the Hedgehog's gameplay and narrative, but also directed Sonic the Hedgehog 3. It was Mark Cerny, who had worked on Sonic 2 during his own time at Sega, who extended the invitation to Yasuhara. The veteran designer was elated to join Naughty Dog, especially so when he learned of their mostly horizontal studio structure, which reminded him of how Sega Japan had operated. For him, it felt like coming home, and his work ethic reflected this. Rather than drawing overhead-level layouts and labeling hazards and points of interest, he would instead draw small scenes of characters attempting to overcome obstacles on the way to achieving their goal. He would draw dozens of little vignettes for each level before arranging them in a way that he felt was suitable. It was a style of workmanship that Stephen White thought was positively beautiful, truly an artist's way of designing levels. Over the course of development, Naughty Dog would swell to nearly 50 people, and while Rubin and Gavin had begun to take measures to better organize the studio to accommodate their expanding size, their years of devoting themselves solely to making games were beginning to take their toll. It came as a shock to everyone when the pair announced that they were ready to retire. Ever since the days of Jam Software, Naughty Dog had been a point of pride and passion for its founders. Aside from their brief departure from the industry in the early 90s, during which Jason Rubin had worked in visual effects and Andy Gavin was attending MIT, the two of them had been making games together since junior high school. Starting with the Crash era, they hardly had more than a day or two off per year. Rubin started to lament that he wasn't all that well-rounded of a person. Making games was all he and Gavin really knew. Crash Bandicoot had made them millionaires, and Rubin had even been named Cosmo's Bachelor of the Month during this period, receiving thousands of emails, nude photos, and even some marriage proposals from countless bachelorettes, but he wasn't in a position to entertain much, if any of them. Naughty Dog had brought the duo success beyond their wildest dreams, but they were so entrenched in their work that they couldn't find the time to enjoy it. This especially affected Rubin, who was ready to move on as early as 2002, but as part of their deal to sell the company to Sony, he couldn't leave until after he had finished 3 games for his new corporate masters. Rather than despair at being stuck in place for at least 2 more years though, as he did still love making games, he saw it as an opportunity to prepare the studio for the inevitable transition. The two co-founders' accounts of how they arrived at the decision to leave diverge a bit here. According to Rubin, they made the decision to leave simultaneously, but Gavin recalls that he personally wasn't certain about leaving until during the 3rd game's development, that it was a process he worked himself through. Regardless of Gavin's upfront commitment to leaving with his lifelong collaborator, however, they would each still choose a successor to take under their respective wings during development of the 2nd and 3rd Jak and Daxter games, teaching them their leadership philosophies and how to run the company, before leaving Naughty Dog in their hands after the trilogy had wrapped. For the studio's left-brained technical lead, Andy Gavin chose Stephen White, who had been with the company since Crash 2, and Jason Rubin would pick designer Evan Wells, who had worked on the first 2 Gex games at Crystal Dynamics before joining Naughty Dog during Crash 3, to be the right brain. Both were indispensable assets to the company, being capable and talented as well as respected. Wells especially had been gradually taking on more responsibilities over time, with the studio's very first intern, Amir Ibrahimi, describing him as a jack of all trades who would work on any part of a game, no matter how small. Ego seemed to be a completely foreign concept to him. The proposal to uplift Wells and White to studio heads was met without any resistance or skepticism from Shuhei Yoshida. Despite nudging Jason Rubin into keeping Jak and Daxter going, he did truly believe that Naughty Dog worked best when left to their own devices, even now as a Sony subsidiary. He approved the decision, and Rubin and Gavin would announce their impending retirement internally shortly thereafter, planning to give Wells and White up to 2 years of training and preparation to take the reins of the studio. By the end of 2002, much of the game's setting and world design had practically been finalized. The dramatic shift in tone would be justified by what Jak and the others had found in the first game's secret ending, an ancient machine that would unleash swarms of evil, metal monsters onto their world before flinging our heroes into a dystopian city hundreds of years in the future. The city's despotic baron would capture Jak, and his ensuing dark eco-experiments would leave him a changed man, dark, angry, and vengeful. This change in personality would be accompanied both by a darker, monstrous alter ego capable of leaving a trail of destruction in his wake, similar to the Incredible Hulk, as well as a proper voice and dialogue for the character. Jak was a silent protagonist in his first outing for the sake of immersing the player into his character. It was believed that if he spoke up, he could potentially say something that the player would find incongruent with their own thoughts on a situation, and thus disconnect from the character. Daxter was meant to pick up the slack on that front. But despite the subtle bits of characterization imbued in Jak, players didn't take to him as a character like they had with Crash. In the words of the game's writer, Dan Arey,
Daxter was already a resounding success, having been named Original Game Character of the Year in the 2nd Annual Game Developers' Choice Awards, but Jak was a different story. Extensive feedback told us that Jak had less personality than a slug on Prozac.
Remedying this became one of the major goals for the sequel. Just as the first game's story hinged on Daxter's transformation, the decision was made to do the same for Jak early on, likely prompting the team to drop Daxter's name from the title to emphasize the focus on the main player character, as well as to possibly put a bit of distance between it and the more kid-friendly connotations that came with the character and sidekick title scheme. Jak would receive a drastic redesign from Bob Raffey to outwardly reflect the changes to his character, and his new design, complete with slicked back hair, goatee, and a slightly more militaristic tunic, would be finalized by April 2002. But there was still the matter of his voice. They needed an actor who would be able to embody both the old and new aspects of Jak's personality, an angry but broken young man whose lost innocence fuels his fierce desire for revenge. Someone who could capture the effervescent rage, but still be sarcastic and snarky enough to keep up with his sidekick, as well as the confusion and anxiety that would come with having to navigate a new and unfamiliar world. Lucky for them, their search not only wouldn't last long, but would lead to probably one of the most fortuitous casting decisions in the medium at the time. As Naughty Dog had begun work on Jak II in Santa Monica, about 20 miles away, their former business partners at Universal Studios were preparing to go into full production on their own major tentpole for 2003, a film adaptation of Marvel Comics' The Incredible Hulk. Directed by Taiwanese filmmaker Ang Lee, the film was set to be a cerebral exploration of repressed trauma from Bruce Banner's childhood. To that end, multiple actors were cast to portray the Hulk's human counterpart throughout his life, showing a physical evolution into the film's male lead, played by Australian actor Eric Bana. After a brief tiff over eye colors and contact lenses, the role of teenage Bruce Banner would go to 23-year-old actor Mike Irwin, whose acting credits at this point in his burgeoning career mostly consisted of one-off guest appearances in network TV shows like Reba and Seventh Heaven, as well as bit parts in raunchy teen comedies American Pie 2 and The New Guy.
Bruce. Bruce, wake up, son. Another nightmare.
I don't know. I don't remember.
While his part in Hulk was small, and not all his scenes would make the final cut, the role of a young Bruce Banner being on his CV would prove to be serendipitous when a casting call for an upcoming video game would be passed along to his agent. Apparently, the character was described as having a dark side, with the Hulk specifically being mentioned. When Irwin's agent told them that they represented someone who had just finished shooting his scenes as the iconic superhero's teenage self, it seemed almost too good to be true. Irwin was ecstatic to take on the role. He had loved video games ever since he was a small child, when his computer engineer father brought home various computers as part of his job. As he grew up, Irwin would partake in his friends' Nintendo consoles, while at home he would play on his Atari 2600 and Sega Genesis, then later the PlayStation and Dreamcast, with two particular favorites being Soul Calibur and Star Wars Masters of Terras Kasi. But outside of those fighters, he also held a firm appreciation for Crash Bandicoot, as did countless others in the late 90s. Knowing that he'd be voicing the main character in Naughty Dog's next big game would only further elevate his enthusiasm, especially after he was given a PlayStation 2 and a copy of the first Jak and Daxter to play as homework for the role. As is often the case in voiceover, Irwin would record his lines as Jak independently from the rest of the cast.
That's just all part of the package, baby. That's just who I am. I just gotta reach down inside and...
But that wouldn't mean he'd be acting in the dark. Whenever the other actors hadn't yet recorded their lines for a given scene, Dan Arey would get in the booth himself to better direct his actors, rather than hang back with the audio engineers. He believed in the mission statement of wanting to elevate the action platformer beyond what it had been pigeonholed into in recent years, and was willing to scream, shout, cry, and above all sweat together, matching an actor's energy to bring out the best possible performance. Unfortunately, just as Rockstar had beaten the first Jak and Daxter to the punch with its no-loading open-world design, Naughty Dog's own compatriots at Insomniac Games would do the same to Jak II and its attempt to reinvigorate the platformer. Released on November 6, 2002, Ratchet and Clank had taken the basic genre framework and threw in a cavalcade of fun and inventive weapons, a story which was well incorporated into the world and gameplay, and a certain sardonicism that lent it an appeal with slightly older players, all within the confines of a teen rating. Critically, it was about as well received as Jak and Daxter, with PSM's Eric Bratcher directly invoking comparisons between the two right at the start of his 9 out of 10 review of the game.
Lots of people are going to take one look at Ratchet and Clank and think it's simply Jak and Daxter in space. And to be honest, they're right. This is Jak and Daxter in space, but with lots of guns, lots and lots of explosions, 30 other gadgets, a bigger storyline, more humor, far less collecting, and you get the idea, right? Ratchet and Clank is not Jak and Daxter or any other game in space. It's something altogether different.
This success naturally extended to the game's sales, which managed to exceed 400,000 copies in North America by September 2003, elevating it to greatest hits status in the territory. While I wasn't able to dig up specific sales numbers for the territory at the time, I was able to find numbers for Japan, which were shockingly high. While its debut on Famitsu sales charts in early December were fairly solid, taking the number 7 spot with just under 50,000 copies sold, by the end of the year it had sold over 275,000 units. And by the time it had fallen out of the top 30 in late February, Ratchet & Clank had sold over 515,000 copies in Japan, completely trouncing Jak and Daxter's sales and chart longevity in the territory, as well as outselling the latest Crash Bandicoot by over 63,000 units in only a fraction of the time. This success can be at least partially owed to Sony releasing a special Ratchet & Clank PS2 bundle for the holiday season for just shy of 27,000 yen. But the numbers didn't lie. Insomniac had successfully tapped the Japanese market with Ratchet, just as Naughty Dog had with Crash. From an outsider's perspective, one would imagine that Jason Rubin, Andy Gavin, and the rest of Naughty Dog would feel at least a bit resentful of Insomniac's recent success, but fans of both studios' work were more likely to be aware of the strong, positive relationship they shared going back to Crash and Spyro. They shared technology, got each other out of some jams here and there, and Jason Rubin was close friends with Insomniac founder Ted Price. The two would even compare notes during development of Jak and Ratchet to make sure they wouldn't step on each other's toes too much with their respective action platforming teams, and to their credit, the two games were totally distinct. But Eric Bratcher's comparison of the two would become the first of many. Following Jak 2's announcement to the world in March 2003, the press was surprisingly receptive to the changes in direction and tone, relieved that the gameplay was still couched in the original's excellent controls and technical foundations, while striving to go beyond what would have been expected. But the comparisons to Insomniac's new heroic duo were almost immediate, with Game Informer noting in their April cover story for Jak 2 that Ratchet & Clank had just recently brought gunplay to the genre, and IGN's Douglas C. Perry loosely invoking Insomniac's latest and greatest in his hands-on preview in March.
If Ratchet and Clank is a departure from the platforming norm in the way Onimusha is a departure from the standard Resident Evil survival horror formula, then Jak 2 is Sony's Devil May Cry.
Of course, Ratchet & Clank wasn't the only point of comparison. The game's Grand Theft Auto inspirations were similarly clocked from the get-go, and would continue to follow it throughout a glowing preview period. But after the quick and incredibly successful release of Grand Theft Auto Vice City the previous year, Rockstar would be taking 2003 off to give the next entry in the series a bit more time to cook. Insomniac, however, would announce in April that the second Ratchet & Clank game, Going Commando, would be coming to the PlayStation 2 in November, putting it in direct competition with Jak 2. Within just a couple years, the platforming genre had gone from being seen as tired and unwilling to evolve, to having two major titles shaking up the formula releasing mere weeks apart from each other, both from studios with legendary pedigrees within the genre, both injecting more high-octane action and mature elements, both featuring a hero and sidekick duo. And as the summer turned to autumn, the game's press started subtly leaning into it, juxtaposing coverage of both games right beside or very close to each other within magazine pages. While the press was on board with Naughty Dog's new vision for Jak's future, however, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty from some players about the studio's confidence in the franchise. To some, Jak 2 appeared to be a result of cynical trend chasing, a misguided attempt to cash in on the success of Grand Theft Auto 3. There was disappointment that the sequel was seemingly abandoning the tried-and-true formula of the original, even if it was understood that the adherence to such a formula was what led to it underperforming in the first place. But Naughty Dog were resolute in their decisions, and while they naturally bred some skepticism, they also drew in plenty of intrigue, curiosity, and excitement for what this bold new direction had in store. They were, once again, successfully moving with the market. After 2 years of development and another $15 million budget, Jak II would be released in North America on October 14th, 2003. Jak II wastes very little time in establishing the new status quo. Not only is the title screen preceded by a fly-through of the new setting, but the main menu has adopted a polished, metallic sheen to further separate itself from the bright colors of the first game. But this aesthetic shift is quickly addressed in the narrative, which follows on directly from the Precursor Legacy's secret ending. As Samos once again provides some narration to set the mood, we see after a fly-through of Sandover Village that what was behind the giant door at Gol and Maya's citadel were a massive precursor ring and some sort of vehicle. Aside from knowing that the latter somehow interacts with the former, though, they aren't sure of their purpose or function. As they all climb aboard for a field test, Jak presses a big button that activates a complex readout on the dashboard. The sky turns dark, and the ring activates. Swarms of dark monsters pour out from it, and a gargantuan beast emerges, roaring.
You cannot hide from me, boy!
Instinctively, Jak presses on one of the controls, and the four of them are launched into the gate, avoiding the behemoth they've unwittingly unleashed onto their world. Their ride explodes as it travels through non-space, and Jak and Daxter, separated from Samos and Kira, find themselves in the far more modern and dystopian Haven City, where local authorities have apparently been waiting for Jak's arrival, capturing him on the orders of the despotic Baron Praxis.
We've been waiting for you.
Don't worry, Jak! I'll save you before you know it!
For 2 years, Jak is tortured as part of the Baron's Dark Warrior program, injected with Dark Eco to create a living weapon to use in his war against the bestial metalhead hordes bearing down on the city. Despite assurances that Jak would be different from other test subjects, his apparent resistance to their experiments leads them to end the program, dispose of Jak, and move on to their final plan. Just after the Baron and his right-hand man leave, however...
Ding ding, 3rd floor! Body chains, roach food, torture devices.
Daxter shows up to bust Jak out, and he learns firsthand that the experiments were far more successful than Praxis had realized.
I've been looking for you for 2 years! Say something! Just this once!
I'm gonna kill Praxis!
Filled with rage at what he'd endured for the past couple years, Jak not only musters the gumption to speak, but the dark eco coursing through his veins sees him transform into a more bestial state, shattering his bindings before Daxter can. But just as Jak is about to lash out at his friend, he regains control of himself, only to transform again when the Baron's forces attack him after they've escaped the fortress.
That was cool! Do it again.
Something's happening to me. Something he did. I can't control it.
Very impressive.
You okay, Jak?
Now burdened with a destructive power he can hardly control, and trapped in a world completely unlike his own, Jak only has one thing on his mind: revenge. At the suggestion of an old man he meets outside the fortress, he and Daxter join up with an underground rebellion against Baron Praxis, in the hopes of using their cause and connections to get close enough to him to return the favor. Thus begins Jak II. Suffice it to say, the basic premise and setting are a far cry from what we had in the first game, but it's surprising and commendable how close it stayed to the original outline. Gone are the bright colors and linear world, and in their place we have various contained areas accessible from the massive hub world that is Haven City, which itself is divided into several sections that become accessible as the story unfolds. Progression is no longer contingent on collecting power cells and precursor orbs, it's all mission-based. Go to the icons on your minimap, get a cutscene where Jak and Daxter are given a job to do, go do it, repeat. It is very GTA, right down to the ability to carjack civilians and the Crimson Guard coming after you if you step out of line. The accompanying high alert music is enough to put you into fight or flight mode thanks to its aggressive opening. By the end, it may also give you a bit of PTSD. But this is only part of what makes Jak 2's overall presentation so mystifying. Josh Mancell returned to compose for Naughty Dog's PS2 dynamic duo once again, with Mark Mothersbaugh producing. Whereas the soundtrack for the Precursor Legacy was meant to adapt to the environment, for Jak 2, Mancell sought instead to invoke an emotional response based on tone and context, rather than make something that was built for the aesthetics. The partially submerged water slums, for example, don't have a dedicated theme that invokes the idea of water. The area shares the same tune as the rest of Haven City. It's this quiet, melodic dirge that gradually builds up into a small march, representing Jak and the Underground's fight against the Baron. It's a melancholic piece that does a terrific job at encapsulating the game's overall tone. Most areas outside the city streets get their own bespoke track, as one would expect. They're all fairly solid, and effort was made to seamlessly blend them with a handful of more intense action pieces whenever the player gets into a fight, about 8 of which had to be done at the last minute because there originally weren't enough of them. Mancell finished them within a couple of days, and as a result they're pretty repetitive, but considering that they don't play for too long, it's not really an issue. They do their job, and they do it well. The cherry on top of this dynamic soundtrack sundae is how it adapts to what the player is doing outside of combat. It's not a long list of actions the soundtrack adapts to, nor are the changes dramatic, but additional instruments are added depending on whether you're flying a zoomer, riding the new jetboard, or have a weapon out. The first two add some light percussion to give the track a bit of momentum. Whereas the latter adds this distorted electronic layer to the track, which does a lot to add to the tension and suspense. Tinging the otherwise orchestral-sounding soundtrack with these distorted elements not only gives the soundtrack some appreciated texture, but it feels perfectly at home with the setting. Art director Bob Raffi was ecstatic about the shift to a dystopian future, feeling like he was being let off his leash to indulge in his pessimistic side, and artist Rob Adams, who did a lot of the work in putting Haven City together, was inspired by movies like The Fifth Element and Ghost in the Shell when helping to define the world's aesthetics. The latter is especially easy to identify when looking at the slums. It wasn't easy for the environment artists to work within the constraints of the PS2's memory, but Evan Wells was able to assess every one of their needs and weigh them against what the game needed. According to Stephen White, Wells was the only person on the team who was able to keep track in his head how the console's memory was being allocated, and would rework parts of the city and its layout so that they would be able to realize their vision. Haven City is a strong setting in terms of variety, scale, and atmosphere. The different sections are all aesthetically distinct and feel purposeful, from the slums to the bazaar to the gardens. Maintown specifically is of particular interest to me. There aren't many specific locations outside of the stadium, one of the palace's support towers, and this massive plaza of nothing, but the canals that run through it and the number of billboards plastered throughout definitely make it feel like it's the part of town everyone wants to be at. There's probably a lot of business and commerce going on here, in addition to the class race events at the stadium. Racing is the hottest sport in Haven City. There are posters advertising the class races all over town, and the winner of the Class 1 race even gets a tour of the palace, so of course, Jak is interested in competing. While there are a handful of other landmarks scattered throughout the city, and navigation is made simple thanks to the distinct areas in the minimap, the palace is the city's centerpiece and primary visual signifier. It towers high over everything else and needs to be kept tethered to these massive support pillars. It's visible from any point in the city and even outside of it, looming over Jak, Daxter, and everyone else within Haven's walls, and even beyond. A constant reminder of Baron Praxis's iron grip. and the most essential components of the city's oppressive atmosphere. You do actually infiltrate it on 2 occasions, once at the end of Act 1, which results in the game's first boss fight against the Baron himself, and again during Act 3 after winning the Class 1 race. The former is definitely one of the game's major highlights, as getting there isn't as simple as walking through the front door like it is later. You have to move along one of the massive support cables stretching high above the city, like Hugo trying to get into Teferi's in Battle Angel. Seeing the sky darken as rain clouds roll in, and the palace getting closer and closer, looking more and more like a small city unto itself as you realize just how big it really is one of those experiences that never really leaves you if you play this game as a kid. This scene would probably look incredible in widescreen, right? Well, once again, Jak II 16:9 mode is unfortunately just cropped from 4:3, so you would be losing visual information on the top and bottom of the frame if you switched aspect ratios. But while we're on the subject, I would like to issue a minor correction to my Jak 1 video regarding video settings. I said that the Precursor Legacy supported progressive scan, which was incorrect. I knew its follow-ups did, and I misremembered and assumed that the first game did too, without checking. For that, I apologize. But that being said, Jak II does support it if you have the right setup. Very forward-thinking. But the game's presentation shines in more than just technical ways or during gameplay. From the beginning, Josh Scher wanted to up the ante with the game's cinematics, using cinematic language to help tell the story, and to avoid the first game's issue of having a level's incidental music clash with the tone of a story scene. If they were going to have Jak II be driven by its narrative and characters, they needed to take proper care in emphasizing these elements. However, the cutscene score would be composed not by Josh Mancell, but by a newcomer to the world of game music, Larry Hopkins. Having spent years working mostly in mixing and sound design in film and television, such as on Star Trek V, Wayne's World, Disney's Beauty and the Beast, Mission Impossible, and the then-recent Spider-Man movie, though much of his work would go uncredited, Hopkins was firmly entrenched in the realm of music, having previously been a technician for artists like Ray Charles and the Rolling Stones. Employees both at Universal and Sony who knew Bruce Swanson, one of the sound designers for both the Precursor Legacy and Jak II, spoke highly of Hopkins and his abilities, and he was quickly brought into the fold. For Hopkins, working on Jak II's cinematic score wasn't so different from how he would approach the same work for film or television. The only major difference in that regard was the deadlines not being nearly as tight, being afforded about 8 months to work on his contributions. And his work is pretty good. Not as memorable as what Mancell had put together for the gameplay, but in fairness, they serve a very different purpose. The whole thing would be much lesser without Hopkins' score, and it may have also been what fully convinced Jason Rubin to let Josh Scher do what he wanted with the cinematics. When Scher showed Rubin the opening scene with the rift gate rising above the ground, without music or sound effects, Rubin thought it was boring and should have been cut down or sped up. The two got into a heated argument over whether putting so much work into the cinematics was worth it, with Scher ultimately winning out. The opening as a whole is a major showcase for the leaps in cinematic proficiency that were made since the first game. The aerial shot moving through Sandover Village and wide shots of the Riftgate are nothing short of wondrous. But I think the real achievement is when we first see Jak in prison. It's the slow reveal, rising from far below the action as the score builds, with Jak's tortured cries of anguish gradually becoming clearer. This is what cements the game's new tone and cinematic identity. As former Naughty Dog employee Taylor Kurosaki would comment to IGN years later, "We were really making movies now." But it isn't just the visual language and Hollywood-quality score that sets Jak II's cinematics above its predecessor. The game was being made at a time when high-fidelity graphics were a major selling point, and the big point of comparison within Naughty Dog during Jak II's development was Kingdom Hearts, which made use of different character models for gameplay and cutscenes. The Precursor Legacy had used the same models for both, and while this wasn't an issue when it was released in 2001, the bar was now being raised, and there was an expectation for video game sequels to have better graphics than their predecessors, even if they were on the same hardware. Pre-release screenshots and trailers of Kingdom Hearts pushed the team at Naughty Dog to use separate, high-poly models for cutscenes, thus making them far more expressive and detailed. Jak alone went from roughly 3,000 polygons for his gameplay model to nearly 15,000 in cutscenes, and the difference is apparent. Daxter especially benefits from the additional 10,000 or so polygons, with the contours of his face now being significantly smoother, and his mouth movements far more articulate.
You two had better run that by me again, cause there's no way I'm going outside the city to face more metalheads!
Sig will show you the ropes.
Considering that the game sports a feature film's worth of cutscenes, this was a smart move. Over the course of the story, Jak and Daxter meet numerous recurring characters, friends and foes alike. The ability to show emotion visually as well as through the actors' performances is an invaluable tool in telling a story in this medium, especially when so much of the supporting cast are meant to keep our heroes on their toes. This especially applies to Crew, who is probably the most GTA-esque character out of everyone you meet in this story. Large and in charge, he's the slimiest, most well-connected gangster in the city, and Jak does his dirty work for him in exchange for gun upgrades, occasional bits of information, and hopefully, a way to get close to the Baron. Everything about him feels purposefully designed to make you uncomfortable without going too far into the realm of revulsion. Between his rotting teeth, obvious glass eye, the rings adorning his stubby sausage fingers, his sheer girth, the hover chair he uses to move his bulk around, the feeding tubes attached to it, his stick-thin and atrophied legs dangling below him, and his deep, belabored breathing punctuating so much of his dialogue.
Quite the money collectors, eh? Here's a gun upgrade. Now get out!
I need my beauty now.
Trust me, brother. There aren't enough hours in the day.
Bill Minkin, who not only voiced the farmer in the first game, but had played small roles in Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, turns in such a strong performance that it nearly makes me feel sick. He's such a despicable monster, even during his more affable moments, that it makes you feel dirty knowing that he could call on you at any time for another job. It's one of the things that makes Kira a bit wary of Jak after they reunite. She just can't believe that he would willingly associate with him. Even Torn and the Underground don't trust him, despite him being their weapon supplier, and they end up stationing Tess there to work as a bartender in the hope that she can pick up on some intel.
Ooh, I love undercover work, baby.
Of course, Crew is just one of the people Jak deals with in his quest for vengeance. Through Torn and the Underground, he makes connections with all sorts of people all over the city. There's the jumpy and neurotic Vin, who runs the city's power grid and is one of the Underground's best informants.
Jak, we've still got trouble at the strip mine. I think the Baron set me up. Actually, I think everybody's trying to kill me.
Core, the old man who directed Jak to the Underground in the first place.
I've seen what metalheads do when they take a city. The destruction, the killing, the devouring.
Ashlyn, the Baron's tough-as-nails daughter and KG officer who feeds intel to Torn.
The metalheads are getting bolder every day. It's almost like they're testing our defenses, like probing attacks. I've got a bad feeling about this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Onin, a soothsayer in the Bazaar whose ability to peer into the past and present has left her with a tenuous grip on linear time.
She says it is good to see you again, Jak. But we've never met before. Before, after, it is all the same.
Her acerbic interpreter, Pecker.
Ow! Touch the goods again, rat boy, and you'll be counting with your toes.
Brooder, the affable lurker whose bar acts as a front for liberating his enslaved kin.
We're no longer evil lurking bad to bones, orangey boy. We good now. Metalheaders are bad. They is enemies.
And the Wastelander, Sig, Crew's main muscle who's worked with him for years.
Hello, cherries. Ready to hunt a few metalheads? Follow me, stick close, and watch my six. It's gonna be fun.
There's a sense of history to practically all of them, an understanding that they're all in the positions they're in because of the totalitarian rule of Baron Praxis. Whereas Gall and Maya fell a bit flat because of their tenuous connections to our heroes, Baron Praxis is a significantly stronger villain because of what he did to Jak. His experiments were specifically targeted and intentional, taking away Jak's innocence and condemning him to a slow, painful death. The dark eco coursing through his veins will eventually kill him, but not before eroding his mind and sanity first. It's a solid motivation for Jak to seek revenge and for the player to hate the Baron right out of the gate, which is only bolstered further once you get out into the city and see the Crimson Guard patrolling around every corner. And it's made even more despicable by the messages that Praxis broadcasts across the city, disseminating propaganda at all hours of the day.
Attention, my loyal citizens. We are looking for a rebel fugitive who has caused the city considerable damage of late. This man is armed and extremely dangerous, and can somehow change into a monstrous creature. We have reports he is working with the metalheads to subvert your city and your safety. Report all sightings immediately.
These broadcasts are unsubtle fascist rhetoric about fealty, strength, rejection of inconvenient truths, and the Baron embodying both the city and the law, not to mention other unsavory details about the world and the lives of its citizens.
Fear not the men in red. Sure, there are occasional complaints about their over-aggressive policing, wanton destruction of people's property during raids, mass arrests, misplaced loved ones, and whatnot. Hey, we're only human. Running a city can be tougher than it looks. Imagine how much worse it would be if the metalheads were in charge. This is your Baron. I have been informed by the Ministry of Extreme Labor that worker productivity is down this month. That is unacceptable. I give you safety, and this is how you repay me. You must work harder, not smarter. Free the mind, and the body will do as it's told. Forced labor will set you free! And to help you in your spiritual motivation, quotas are doubled next month!
Literal Nazi stuff here. Everything he does is for the sake of holding onto, expanding, and exerting his power. Defiance is death, and innocent lives are merely collateral damage to him. He cut off water to the slums in his attempts to quash the underground, a desperate move with wider consequences for those completely uninvolved with the movement, but to Baron Praxis, it doesn't matter. People's lives are basically just bargaining chips to him. He even threatens to kill his daughter Ashlyn when he learns she's been spying for the underground. But the Baron isn't the only villain in Jak II. In place of the first game's lurkers, who as mentioned are used as slave labor here, we have the Metalheads, a race of vicious beasts that have been attacking the city for years. Like their name suggests, one of their two defining physical attributes is the metal plating on their bodies. No matter how big they are, how many legs they walk on, or if they use claws or weapons, all of them have at least some metal on them. Their other motif is their skull gems, big, glowing yellow spots on their heads that help them stick out of the environment. These two elements and how they're incorporated into every one of their designs make it impossible to mistake a metalhead for anything else, and in my opinion, make them an aesthetically more interesting enemy than the lurkers. However, there's more to the conflict between the Baron and the metalheads than there initially appears. Early on, Jak and Daxter see some guards giving eco to metalheads, and Crew tells them that the Baron is doing it as part of a ploy to hold on to his power. The war is still very real, of course. His faceplate covers the scars from when he tried to take the fight directly to them at their nest years ago, and while Praxis is planning to use their dependency on him for eco to make them weak, it's just another method for him to stay on the throne. Metalheads assault the city? Successfully fight them off to gain people's trust. Defeat them in glorious combat, be hailed as a hero, and people would want you to stay in charge, at least in theory. And when citizens start noticing that their eco reserves are running low, just deny it.
Pay no attention to the groundless rumors about low eco supplies. As your Baron, I assure you, the city has an endless supply of eco stores. Those who would say we are running out are only trying to frighten and subvert. I have everything in control. I command you to have no fear.
Baron Praxis is a truly loathsome villain, and Clancy Brown, who by this point was already well known and beloved as the voice of Lex Luthor in Superman the Animated Series, and Dr. Cortex in the Crash Bandicoot series starting with the second game, does as superb a job as ever in bringing life to such a contemptuous villain. The kind you already want to bring down by the time you're given control of Jak, but find your hatred for him growing as you learn more about him and his goals. He feels so much more tangible and threatening than Gall and Maya did because there's a cold logic to his actions driven by his own selfish ambitions. The personal vendetta Jak has against him eventually just becomes the cherry on top, and after everything the Baron did to him, everything he took from him, it's not hard to see why Jak changed so much.
Let's go, Jak.
Daxter! It is you!
Kira!
Oh, I never thought I'd be so glad to see your furry mug. And Jak, you look different.
It's been a tough ride.
Understatement of the century right there.
For job too, eh?
Kill metalheads, get toys. Sounds good to me. I guess you guys are in. I want the Baron to know that it's me who's hurting him.
The bright but quiet farm boy we knew in the Precursor Legacy is long gone, broken by a new world he wasn't prepared for and corrupted by Dark Eco. It's a dramatic change to the point where he's basically a different person altogether, but that was the point. The team at Naughty Dog found that players thought he was as interesting as Marmite and knew that in order to tell a more involved story, they'd have to inject some personality into him, and his very first line basically acts as a statement of intent for Naughty Dog and Jak himself.
I'm gonna kill Praxis!
From a character perspective, it's only fitting that his first words would be this guttural declaration of vengeance. His motivations are easy to grasp, and having him talk at all, much less saying stuff like this, signals to the player that there's no coming back from this. Moreover, it solidifies Naughty Dog's desire to try and tell a story that has some actual weight and substance to it. Of course, their plans for that also involved going down an edgier, more mature path than they had dared to venture before, and that road has a lot of bumps and pitfalls that so many fail to avoid. Jak II isn't quite an exception. The character's newfound abrasiveness comes on very strongly at first, and can be a bit off-putting.
Hello, strangers. My name is Kor. May I help?
You look like a reasonably smart man. I want information. Where the hell am I?
Sorry. He's new to the whole conversation thing.
As you can see, Daxter is still as cheeky as ever. He was already so well liked by players and critics that the only changes made to him were purely contextual. He drinks, he stares at Tess's chest, and uses the occasional light swear now, but at his core, he's the same as he was in the last game. He provides a lot of the much-needed levity and helps diffuse some of the tension that naturally comes from having such a hardened hero, and as a result, the two have a much stronger character dynamic. Jak is the straightforward, serious one, while Daxter remains the comic relief. That being said, Jak isn't all business all the time. As he gets his bearings, meets more people, and starts to understand just how big this conflict with the Baron and the Metalheads really is, he starts to cool down a bit. He's still a pretty angry guy, but he's not as confrontational as he was when he first got out of prison. Though it would be a bit of a stretch to say that he has a wide emotional range, or at least that he's able to communicate those emotions very well. Mike Irwin does a really good job voicing the character. It's based on his natural speaking voice, just a tad lower and mixed with a light touch of gravel to sound a bit more gruff. He doesn't get very many opportunities to deviate from that sort of demeanor, at least not extensively, but he does a solid job portraying Jak as more than just a single-minded hothead with a thirst for vengeance. He gets confused, cheeky, smitten, and embarrassed. He hasn't lost his touch with animals, as he shows when he's able to pet the kid's crocodile without it growling at him, and pride isn't beneath him either. That being said, Jak does have every right to be pissed off, not just because of the imprisonment and torture, or even the loss of his world when the Metalheads came through the portal. Those Dark Eco experiments did more than just make him angry and give him an animalistic superform he can't control. It's also slowly killing him. The Baron himself says as much in one of his broadcasts that's directed towards him specifically, and it's corroborated by the Precursor Oracle found in the water slums. Over time, it will drive him insane and he'll eventually succumb to it. Thankfully, the Oracle is able to help temper that dark madness burning inside him in exchange for the Metalhead's skull gems, but it's just delaying the inevitable. In terms of character design, Jak's new look feels like a natural evolution of how he looked in the first game, and I think it's a good look overall. The main visual components, his backpack, shoulder plate for Daxter, chest ring and straps, goggles, and overall color scheme, are all still intact, but they've been adapted to the new setting. His hair's been slicked back to be a bit less conspicuous while evading authorities. Rather than wrapping his hands and feet in bandages, he's now wearing fingerless gloves and steel-toed boots. And instead of a high collar, Jack's now rocking a crimson bandana, with the intent being that it would keep him from breathing in the toxic fumes of the wasteland outside the city, though he never actually pulls it up in the final game. His facial features have also changed slightly with age. His ears are longer, his face is a bit sharper, and his eyes aren't quite as big as before. Not to mention, he grew a small goatee while in prison, which adds to the more mature visage without making him look straight up old. Though in the Japanese version, the goatee is turned off by default, but you can quickly unlock a toggle for it in every version. I'm a fan of the whole ensemble personally, which is impressive considering the nature of Jack's original design. He was basically designed by committee to have a broad global appeal, and trying to take that and change it to fit a very new, very different, and more focused design philosophy while making it feel like an organic evolution of what came before would seem like an impossible needle to thread. Credit to Bob Raffi, he managed to pull it off without making Jack look too edgy. It is a bit edgy, of course, but aside from maybe the goatee, it doesn't feel like it's trying too hard. That sentiment can apply to Jak II as a whole, really. Like Jak himself, it starts off on the edgy, serious side for the most part, but as it goes on, you see more and more of the first game's charm seep in. There's Daxter, obviously, but the game isn't above being a bit self-deprecating, leaning on the fourth wall to poke fun at itself and its conventions here and there. Like when Crew signs Jak up for a client's racing team and Daxter reads the exhaustive list of rights and proceeds that will go to the greedy mobster rather than to him and Jak.
Toy rights, shoe lines, mood rings, game rights. Game rights?
Or when Jak derisively lays out, in plain English, the limited variety and objectives that were expected of action games at the time.
I bet you've hatched another brilliant plan in that hungry little brain of yours. So, who or what do we have to shake down, knock out, or blow up?
But Jak himself tends to be the most frequent subject of this. There are several points where Jak II makes light of him having once been a silent protagonist. There's his response to Daxter begging him to say something in the opening, of course, and a couple of Orange Lightning's quips shortly after the prison break. But it's also used in a way that doesn't really call much attention to itself with Crew's mechanic client. It's very obviously Kira, but she's working behind a curtain when Jak and Daxter stop in during Act 1, and has no patience chatting with who she thinks are just a couple of hired goons. When they drop by early in Act 2, the pair get fed up with her combativeness and Daxter starts piping up, leading to Kira revealing herself when she recognizes his voice. And that's when it hits you. Not only did Daxter not talk during the earlier scenes with her, but the reason she didn't realize she was talking to Jak was because she, like the player, had never heard him speak before. The people Jak meets along the way all have their quirks and idiosyncrasies that make them memorable, and Jak himself is rarely dismissive of any of them. For example, he knows that Vin is extremely jumpy and paranoid, and so he takes the time to be kind and respectful toward him without issue or irony.
Vin, buddy, we need a favor. We need you to switch on the access elevator in one of the palace's support towers.
I could link the phase loop lines into the primary coils, and presto, you've got instant lift juice.
Vin, you're a genius.
He'll chuckle when Daxter messes with him, but Jak himself won't toy with Vin. And despite initially being a bit standoffish, he and Daxter start forging a genuine bond with Sig, whose big and tough exterior belie the jovial teddy bear he really is, when he's not in the thick of combat, that is. He thinks the boys may have what it takes to be wastelanders like him, and even confides in them that he's contemplating getting out of Crew's employ when he starts learning about some of the big guy's more recent plans and dealings, which says a lot considering how long he's been in the game and the kind of things he's probably had to do, though unfortunately Crew wakes up from his nap before he can spill the beans. On the flip side, however, is Errol, the Baron's right-hand man, commander of the Crimson Guard, and the best racer in the city. While he wasn't able to dispose of Jak as ordered, Errol doesn't shoot him on sight when they cross paths again at the stadium.
You're the talk of the town, Jak. You give the people hope. How pathetic. I would have enjoyed killing you in prison. But now, it'll be so much more fun to take you on the track, in front of the entire city. I can hear the roar of the crowd now, as everyone sees their hope die.
Even Crew is putting pressure on Jak to throw the championship race and let Errol win because—
You bet against us?
Jak, it's just business. You've become a symbol to those townies. They'll bet everything on a glimmer of hope. What better time to make money?
Seems old Tub of Butter will do anything or betray anyone for a quick buck. But it's a bit more personal than that. Errol's been flirting with Kira and getting into her good graces for a while now. It gets to a point where she seems to start developing some affection for him, saying he's the best racer she's ever seen while right in front of Jak. Combine this with Ashlyn seeming to show some affection for Jak, and it opens a bit of a rift between him and Kira. It quickly gets patched up though when Jak shows appreciation for her efforts to rebuild the Rift Rider that brought them here in the first place.
You did all this? I mean, that's useful.
Will you two stop moping around and make up already?
I don't know how controversial it is to say this, given some of the comments on my Jak 1 video, but I like the new Jak. There's an actual character here that you can properly build up and explore by virtue of trying to make him a person and not just a cipher. But I can understand why some people would be turned off by the change. Narratively and thematically cogent as it is, it's easy to write him off as just being another contemporary edgelord, especially early on, and especially when Dark Jak is taken into consideration. But again, he isn't always scowling and trigger-happy, and as pieces of his old life come back into view, he does start to relax a bit, going from demanding answers to waiting for answers to come to him. The big turning point for this is near the start of Act 2. Jak's just confronted the Baron at the palace personally and ripped him a new one, but not before eavesdropping on a secret meeting between him and the Metalhead leader. He now knows that his quest for vengeance, while nowhere near over, is feasible, but things are getting more complicated. And as if the conflict engulfing Haven City at large isn't enough to give him pause, a quick trip to Dead Town to push some metalheads back from a sacred site leads him and Daxter to make an earth-shattering discovery.
Is that? No, it couldn't be. That's not...
It's Samos's hut.
But what? How? When? Where? Why?
We're in the future, Dax. This horrible place is our world.
Now, from the player's perspective, this isn't all that shocking. It was mentioned during the game's pre-release period, and the presence of both the Oracle and Precursor orbs basically give this away within the first hour of the game. But from the characters' perspectives, it completely reframes how they see Haven City. It's no longer a foreign place separate from their world, it is their world, twisted and transformed by war, strife, and time. They no longer feel quite so separated from it all, and that strained connection only grown stranger when, right after discovering Samos's dilapidated hut, they finally meet the Shadow, the enigmatic leader of the Underground, who turns out to be...
So, you're the new recruits who keep getting into trouble.
Oh, no, not you!
Welcome to our humble underground movement. I am known as the Shadow, but you may call me Samos. And you are?
A younger version of Samos? This invites further questions, none of which he's able to answer because he's apparently never met Jak and Daxter before.
And I never forget a face, especially one that ugly.
So it begins.
So now the complexity of the situation is really starting to ramp up, and it's exacerbated even further when Kira reveals she's been trying to rebuild the Rift Rider to get them all back home, and that the old Samos we knew has been locked up by the Crimson Guard for who knows how long. And that's to say nothing of the fight for the throne, protecting this kid who's suspected to be the rightful heir, and how the Metalheads, the Precursors, and Haven City's original founder, Mar, tie into all of it. Legend tells of a powerful Precursor artifact, the Precursor Stone, being hidden within Mar's tomb, which itself is allegedly hidden somewhere within the city. The Baron wants the stone so he can use its power to wipe out the Metalheads, but he would also be completely unstoppable and the fight for the city would be lost forever. Luckily, even if Praxis does find the tomb, he wouldn't be able to get inside. Only Mar's descendants can enter the tomb and face the test of manhood to acquire the stone. So since they have the kid, the Underground plans to find the tomb first and swipe the stone before the Baron. How does Jak, who has his own score to settle and life-threatening ailment to remedy, respond to all of this? He starts listening. The renegade approach he's been taking has gotten him far and helped those who have employed him, but it's also starting to set them back in spots. Underground members have had to relocate because of his reckless assault on the palace. The Baron has started deploying upgraded Hellcat cruisers to patrol the city, and blast bots to try and destroy them at their hideout. What started as simple payback has now firmly entrenched him and Daxter into the overarching conflict, and whereas at the beginning Jak would have just shrugged that off because what mattered to him was hurting Praxis, by the midpoint he's gained an awareness of the stakes and is now committed to the fight. He even throws himself into Mars' tomb when its oracle deems the kid to be far too young to face the trials within, sealing himself and Daxter inside until they pass the trials and recover the stone. Transforming Jak into an edgier, more mature character was always a risky move. I'm sure there was some small contingent of people who thought it would corrupt the youth or something, but it was worth it to see Jak really come into himself and become a more well-defined character beyond that initial impression. He's edgy, but well-meaning, amenable, but not gullible, fierce, but appreciative, a hothead, but still a hero. And through it all, he's still depicted as being a flawed person trying to rediscover himself. There are some bumps along the way. Daxter has to get used to not being the sole talker, and Kira needs to adjust to Jak no longer being such a pure soul, but it's all grounded in organic character interaction within this hostile setting. And thankfully, when it comes to combating those hostilities, Jak is just as capable as he's always been, and his capabilities have been augmented further by the new toys at his disposal. When it came to gameplay and control, the first Jak and Daxter was already tight but malleable. Chaining together different moves was effortless, all of them had a purpose, and they all felt good. For Jak II, this largely hasn't changed. The old eco powers are gone, but they've all been replaced by Jak's new morph gun, the 4 different attachments for which echo their respective colors of eco. The red scattergun is a shotgun with a short range and wide spread. The yellow blaster rifle is a semi-automatic ranged weapon. The Vulcan Fury takes the speed of blue eco and converts it into a light machine gun. And the Peacemaker, while it doesn't echo anything specific to dark eco, reflects its destructive potential by basically being Jak II's equivalent of the BFG 9000. It's teased as early as Act 1, where Sig uses it at the pumping station, and when you finally get it for yourself toward the start of Act 3, it doesn't disappoint. Its low ammo capacity and drop rate don't detract from its coolness either. Rather, they turn the Peacemaker into something you only pull out when you really need it. It's your ace in the hole. The addition of guns is probably the most controversial inclusion to Jak II's gameplay in a vacuum. I've noticed that they've led to some people, okay, a lot of people, treating the game more like a third-person shooter. You're able to take out enemies from a relatively safe distance once you get the blaster, but playing the game with this mindset leaves the experience feeling a bit hollow, if not frustrating. The aiming is entirely automatic, and while it works well enough most of the time, it doesn't always feel good and rarely feels precise. However, when you start thinking of these weapons as extensions of Jak's existing moveset and treat them accordingly, everything starts to fall into place. It's not enough to simply aim and fire all the time. To really get the most out of the morph gun, you need to combine it with Jak's punches and kicks. The scattergun, for example, can be fired twice without pumping it after punching an enemy. Shooting the blaster after landing a melee attack has you fire off a quick burst of shots faster than you could do manually, and doing the same with the Vulcan completely skips its wind-up period, allowing you to start firing it at full speed immediately. While there are a handful of enemies who you do need to handle from a distance, either because of melee being too dangerous or because you simply can't get close enough to them, the way the guns are incorporated into the gameplay does promote an aggressive playstyle, and using them in tandem with your melee attacks is further encouraged by the majority of enemies requiring more than one hit to beat, which is much easier to accomplish when you lead with a punch or spin kick and then unload a burst or two with the blaster, or start immediately going full tilt with the Vulcan, which can chew through ammo quickly but is great for crowd control. Giving Jak a gun as part of the series overhaul almost certainly didn't do it any favors when comparisons were being drawn between it and Ratchet and Clank. The latter prided itself on a wide variety of weapons and gadgets to give the player free reign over how they wanted to tackle the various encounters across its many worlds. However, this point of comparison is only skin deep. Ratchet and Clank definitely has its fair share of platforming in addition to action and gunplay, but Jak II has very different priorities and integration for its significantly smaller arsenal. The number of weapons may be fewer, but each feels more purposeful, while still allowing the player room to decide which ones they want to use, whereas Ratchet and Clank lays the burden of choice almost entirely on the player. Moreover, Jak II integrates a wider variety of melee and movement abilities into its combat, while Ratchet's melee attacks are rigidly separated from his other weapons. This isn't to say I think Ratchet and Clank is bad, not at all. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on the first two games, I've got a bonus video up on my Patreon about them right now if you want to pitch in and help me put these videos together. The two just have very different design goals and go about achieving them in different ways. Case in point, the morph gun is only one of the new things Jak has to play with. Starting early in Act 2, you get full, unfettered use of the jetboard, which was previously only usable on a closed course at the stadium. It's a simple hoverboard Kira invented, which allows you to move faster than you can on foot, and across various terrain that gives Jak trouble, like water, pools of dark eco, the polluted filth in Dead Town, and some steep inclines. You can also do tricks with it like in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, as was the style at the time, and you get a speed boost if you land a perfect 360, and it's really fun to chain these together. It feels good to control, though not as good as in Tony Hawk, but it's a bit of a liability in the city outside of a few side missions. Colliding with pedestrians can set off the guards, and colliding with them will hurt you. You're better off jacking a zoomer to get around. Rounding out the new additions is Jak's new Dark Eco-induced transformation, Dark Jak. After absorbing enough of the stuff from dead enemies and crates, you can press L2 at any time to transform and wreak absolute havoc on anything that dares to get close to you. Your melee attacks are all you have at your disposal at first, but not only are they faster than usual, but Dark Jak will quickly move towards enemies while attacking. You're more durable, and the Dark Eco jolting outward from his body helps deal damage as well. It's also just really gratifying to use, leaning really hard into the action part of action platformer. It doesn't take a whole lot of eco to fill the gauge, but it's enough that you don't want to just whip this out for a small scuffle. You're going to want to hold on to this for a big fight with a ton of enemies, but by the time you start getting into those big fights, you're probably not going to be using the form to get into a brawl. The skull gems you collect from beating metalheads are used to unlock new Dark Jak powers, with each metalhead only ever dropping a single gem. By the midpoint of Act 1, you'll already have enough to unlock the first dark power, Dark Bomb. It's a huge shockwave that instantly kills all normal enemies in a wide radius, replacing the ground pound attack and even proving useful against bosses by being able to end a phase of the fight on its own. It's only the first of 4 abilities, though they get less impressive from there. Dark Blast can be acquired by the end of the first act, but it feels redundant, doing the same thing as Dark Bomb, only in the air. Invincibility is cool, but you don't get it until well into the third act, giving you little time to appreciate it. But it does mean you don't have to worry about turning back to normal if you drop down to 1 hit point. This may have been a holdover from early concepts for Dark Jak, as according to the design bible, it was originally going to leave him with a single hit point after turning back. The last power, Giant Mode, gets even less time to use it, as you won't hit the 100 gem threshold until sometime during the final assault on the Metalhead Nest at the end of the game. You would not only have to double all the way back to the water slums to unlock it, but it wouldn't actually help in the final battle since the Metalhead leader is immune to melee attacks, and Dark Bomb and Blast only take out half a section of his health bar. You do move faster and jump higher, which is great, but it's honestly little more than a novelty. Of course, these new toys don't mean much without understanding the context in which they're used. Because Jak II is mission-based, you're going to be progressing through the game at the rate dictated by the story. There's plenty of variety in mission types, locations, and even gameplay. Sometimes you'll be zooming through the streets of Haven City to either escort people of interest, transport contraband, or even race. Oftentimes, you'll be venturing beyond the city wall, fighting hordes of metalheads while making your way through a series of platforming challenges. And other times, you'll be playing with different modes of gameplay outside the norm, be they the class races, turret sections, or trudging around in the Titan suit. Those last two are pretty hit and miss. The turret sections at the drill platform are alright but kind of samey, though thankfully there are only 2 missions with them. Meanwhile, the Titan suit controls pretty stiffly, and aside from its third and final appearance in the underport, feels pretty unnecessary. It doesn't help that it isn't contextualized at all by the narrative, making it feel like a last-minute addition. This in and of itself isn't necessarily bad, but it does leave me wondering. The class races, though? Between the sense of speed, track layouts, and slightly loose handling, they're pretty exhilarating, especially when you spot the shortcuts over the bottomless chasms. They also act as the backdrop and battleground for the little subplot with Errol, which gives them a bit more narrative weight. You know, aside from getting access to the palace for winning the championship. The Class 2 race is also one of the 2 times you get to play as Daxter, and while in this instance it's purely cosmetic, it's entertaining watching him handle the hoverbike. Jak even commends him for his performance and winning the race, which is a genuinely nice moment the two of them share as best buds.
I'm proud of you, Dax.
Really?
Yeah, you did great.
No, we did great. Right, partner?
The other time is during the tests of manhood at the end of Act 2, where you have to run down a linear path toward the camera away from a giant spider in an homage to Crash Bandicoot. Daxter's on-foot controls and moves are the same as Jak's too, which makes the transition fairly painless, though you do have to get used to the differences in speed and momentum. It's nice having him participate even just a little bit this time around, after having no physical involvement in the last game. However, because of the GTA-inspired mission structure, you're going to be spending a good chunk of your time moving between various locations all over the city. It's not like it takes more than a few minutes to go from one end to the other, but there are roughly 70 story missions in this game, the vast majority of which will see you navigating the city to start them, and a decent amount of those take place in a location separate from where you accept them. That time adds up over the course of a single playthrough, which, going by howlongtobeat.com, will take a new player roughly 16 hours, though this playthrough took me about 10. Add on to that the need to mindfully navigate to avoid drawing attention from the Crimson Guard, or accidentally blowing up your zoomer. Neither of these things will slow you down all that much if you know when to best swap hover zones, but they can easily become a nuisance. Haven City's atmosphere is impeccable, and I do love the different sections of it. There's character to the setting, but it's impossible to ignore the feeling that, despite the dense crowds of nameless NPCs with mix-and-match features, it feels somewhat empty. There's not much to do in the city itself during downtime outside of these optional side missions that you can start by going to the bag icons on the map and talking to these holographic signposts with the underground symbol. They're mostly bite-sized objectives that see you completing ring challenges, doing races, and collecting objects like Precursor orbs, which are also the reward for completing them. But unlike the Skull Gems, which are used to unlock new Dark Jak powers, the Precursor Orbs, which can also be found hidden in areas other than the city streets, are only used to unlock secrets, none of which have any tangible effects on gameplay until after beating the game. They start small with things like big and small head modes and being able to turn off Jak's soul patch, but gradually escalate to things like being able to watch all the cutscenes in a previously completed act of the story, a scrapbook full of concept art, and extra gun courses for the Vulcan Fury and Peacemaker. After finishing the story, though, you can also unlock a level select, invulnerability, unlimited ammo, and unlimited Dark Jak, with the last secret, unlocked after acquiring 200 of the game's 286 orbs, being the ability to play through the game again in Hero Mode. It's like a cross between New Game Plus and a Challenge Mode, where you start the game with all of your guns, and the secrets list has been changed to let you unlock invulnerability and unlimited ammo and Dark Jak fairly early on, but enemies take more damage and metalheads will always drop a Skull Gem, regardless of how many times you've killed them. But again, to even unlock Hero Mode, you not only have to beat the game, but also collect 200 orbs, which can be a trial in and of itself. We may as well rip that band-aid off now while we're on the subject. Jak 2 has solid mission variety and does well to retain its predecessor's platforming roots while incorporating additional combat abilities. It's also significantly harder than its predecessor, whether it be because of aggressive enemies, most attacks dealing 2 hit points of damage rather than 1, minimal health pickups, or the game's inconsistent stinginess with checkpoints. Jak 2 has garnered a reputation for being one of the most brutally difficult games on the PlayStation 2, and it's understandable why. Certain missions in particular are notorious for giving players an inordinate amount of trouble for their particular point in a playthrough. One such mission is when Jak is tasked with blowing up some ammo in the Crimson Guard's fortress, which opens with a section where you have to outrun and avoid a security tank and dodge laser-guided cannons, all while you're watching from the tank's perspective. It doesn't last long, and there's enough of a pause before the tank fires for you to get out of its line of fire, but I had a fair amount of trouble with it when I was younger, and I've heard from a fair number of others who've struggled with it as well. The visibility of the lasers contributes to this, as you're either more focused on the tank's targeting reticle, or the scan lines, green filter, and warped perspective of the tank's visual feed can make it hard to gauge their position or to even notice. The game's boss fights aren't always a walk in the park either. There are only 4 of them, 3 of which cap off the game's 3 acts, but they all have their own annoyances. The first fight against Praxis at the palace has openings that aren't the most obvious to new players, and his last phase can be absolutely chaotic if you don't have Dark Jak at the ready to instantly nuke him. The second fight against him in Mars' tomb is a bit irritating because you have to wait for him to deploy bombs that you kick back at his spider mech, and it's easy to hit them at the wrong angle and miss him completely, meaning you have to go through the phase again to kick that last bomb or two. The Metalhead leader, the final boss of the game, only gets really hectic during his final phase, when he drops down to attack you personally. You have to stay on the move while continuing to unload on him, and break the crates around his den for more blaster ammo, and only blaster ammo. What's more is that he can obstruct your view if you're not careful, and Dark Bomb only cuts his health down by half of a section rather than a full one, so no matter what, you're going to be chipping away at him. But then there's the third boss fight against the big guy himself, Crew. In order to crack open the Precursor Stone, Baron Praxis has recruited Haven City's most notorious crime lord to construct a special bomb to do the trick. If you couldn't tell based on how he regularly pays Jak in weapon upgrades, Crew loves weapons, and Praxis has given him the opportunity to build his Piercer Bomb, which has replaced the cannon Mar had built to break into the Metalhead nest as his new favorite weapon. But as young Samos learned from the plants in the forest, if the stone is opened by force, the resulting explosion would destroy the world, which Vin confirms to Ashlyn. Crew tries to bribe Jak and Daxter to leave the weapons lab and forget what they saw, but the stakes are far too high now.
Not this time, Crew. I'm through being your hired gun.
Then it's war, isn't it?
Structurally, the Crew fight isn't complicated. Just destroy his little hollow clones and then shoot the real Crew. It's the sheer number of clones that give you trouble.
Surprise! More of me than you can handle.
When they get too close, they shock you and disappear, thankfully only dealing 1 point of damage, but it's not hard to get overwhelmed and they rarely drop health packs. The damage upgrade Crew tries bribing you with encourages you to use the scattergun, which does a decent job with crowd control, and the Peacemaker works well too thanks to the surrounding crates dropping any kind of ammo, but the clones can quickly wear you down if you aren't careful, especially during the final phase when they seem to spawn endlessly. But it's all worth it to see Butterboy go out with his precious bomb. There are a decent number of missions that filter players or cause them to rage quit, but easily the most infamous one is escaping the water slums with the seal piece. You go all the way to the back of the area to grab the MacGuffin, only to be ambushed by swarms of Crimson Guards. You have to fight your way through unending hordes of them without getting too close to their dropships for too long, as the guns on those will lock in on you as well. But the guards themselves are able to shoot you from a distance, dealing 2 points of damage per shot when you only have 8 hit points, and there are no health kits to be found. They drop in from just about every possible angle, meaning it's not enough to just focus on firing in front of you. You have to be vigilant and cover your rear and sides as well. The city security systems will kill you instantly if you touch the water too, so you have to fight. And of course, the mission starts with a fake out if you aren't paying attention to your big map in the menu, as the path in front of you at the first fork leads to a dead end. The saving grace is that you won't be hurting for ammo since that's what the KG drop, but that's hardly a consolation. Of course, it has been proven that you can destroy the security drone that protects the water with a well-timed Dark Bomb, but since there's no Dark Eco available during this mission, you have to fill up the meter beforehand, and even then, you only get 1 shot at it. I've never been able to pull it off either. I have, however, been able to just ride the jetboard through the whole thing before any dropships locked on or guards dropped on top of me, which isn't all that easy either. The other commonly used method is to pull out a gun, usually the Vulcan, and just punch your way through everything to force the guards out of your way while maintaining momentum. It's the riskiest one of the bunch because you're still going right up to them and making yourself a target for their dropships, but it's still easier than the other methods for a lot of people. It's also the one mission where the commonly used combination of Jak's aerial spin kick with the blaster rifle really gets a lot of use from me these days, simply because it's effective at suppressing enemies from every direction. However, you don't have to look very hard to find examples of people using this method pretty much everywhere throughout the game, and I think that may contribute at least a little bit to its status as being extremely difficult. Make no mistake, the game can be pretty hard, but relying on this technique for just about every encounter with enemies is honestly pretty unnecessary and dumb, simply because it takes that notion of combining Jak's moveset with his weapons to heart without consideration for effective use cases or other options. It's also a tremendous waste of ammo, since most of your shots won't even hit anything most of the time. You'd be much better off using a grounded spin kick and blaster burst combo in a lot of situations, or if you're fighting multiple enemies that die in a single hit, using the scatter gun once they've grouped together to take them out in a single shot. And if there are multiple enemies that take more than one hit to kill coming at you from a single direction, the Vulcan Fury takes care of that easily with its high rate of fire. Spin kick with that and you don't even have to wait for the barrel to spin up. You'll probably end up using more ammo than is strictly necessary this way, but suppressing fire is the Vulcan's whole deal. Jak has this fun repertoire of moves that he can combine with his new toys, and figuring out how these pieces fit together and when they're best used is part of the fun and challenge. Plus, with only a few exceptions, enemies tend to spawn or make themselves known while in front of you, so as long as you keep track of them visually, you won't have to think to rely on this aerial blaster shot to deal with enemies you can't see. Of course, this only helps so much in missions like escorting crew's men through the sewers, but that brings me to my other point about the game's difficulty. The missions aren't really all that long. While checkpoints can be scarce at times, rarely is that such a big issue. Within a couple minutes, you're usually back where you failed at and can pick up from there. As such, there's a degree of memorization, trial and error, inherent to a fair amount of the game, and while this sort of design philosophy is one that is easy to find annoying or even aggravating, the brevity of most of these missions makes it less frustrating because you don't feel like you've lost that much time. At least, that's how I look at it. You'd think that hero mode wouldn't have these issues since you unlock the game-breaking secrets so early on, but you would only be half right. You can farm all the skull gems you need to unlock every dark power as early as the first trip to the pumping station if you're really dedicated, but hero mode overall is a bit boring before you hit 30 orbs. After that, it's extremely cathartic, at least for a while. Blowing through the water slums mission with the Peacemaker or simply waltzing past the guards is truly transcendent. But even with invulnerability turned on, it isn't without challenge. I tried playing through hero mode while working on this script, and I couldn't get past the eco-tanker mission. The flying guards are just too aggressive in this mode, and your turret still takes damage, seemingly even faster than in a normal playthrough. So hero mode is still challenging, just in different ways. The somewhat inconsistent ways in which Jak II's difficulty manifests can make them seem like design oversights, but according to Stephen White, it was absolutely intentional. Jason Rubin felt that a possible contributing factor to the first game's sales not being as high as they were expecting, in addition to the market moving away from games like it, was the rental market. The Precursor Legacy wasn't all that long or hard to beat, meaning that interested players were more likely to beat it within a 3-day rental period, and if they did beat it in that time, they would be less inclined to buy it. It was one thing to make a game longer by adding more things to do, but that playtime could be extended further by making it more difficult, which didn't require as much development time or resources. Furthermore, longer games were seen as more worth the $50 upfront purchase price. This wasn't just a Naughty Dog thing either, as similar considerations were made for The Simpsons Hit and Run, which released that same holiday season. There's also the frame rate, which does target 60 and, like its predecessor, often hits it, but it's not uncommon for it to chug a bit. This was a known concession made for higher quality graphics. This doesn't necessarily absolve Jak II of its various difficulty spikes or how frustrating the game can be, but it does contextualize why it was made this way. And for what it's worth, while those hard parts are still hard, I don't think the game is as brutal as a lot of people believe it to be. You just have to remember that Jak can do more than run, jump, and shoot guns, and that you can combine the latter with his melee attacks to get more out of them. Playing the game like this is genuinely more interesting and satisfying than treating it like a sloppy third-person shooter or Ratchet and Clank wannabe, because it isn't either of those things. Take chances, learn your kit, and get creative with it. After all, taking chances is how we got Jak II in the first place, and it's how we got not just this new and intriguing setting, but a much more involved narrative. I want to preface this section with a reminder that storytelling is an art, not a science. Whether that story is fictional or a retelling of actual events, practically every decision made in its construction is a creative one. The notion of quote-unquote objectivity when it comes to assessing art is almost entirely nebulous, even when considering generally accepted practices, techniques, and guidelines like shot-reverse shot, the line of action, setup and payoff, and even narrative structures like the hero's journey or flat arc. This also extends to where work lays its focus, be it in plot, story, characters, themes, atmosphere, etc. As it was Naughty Dog's first major foray into telling stories through video games, Jak II had a lot of challenges to overcome, not the least of which was carving out something deeper and more engaging than what they had done in the first game. While it wasn't impossible to do this while retaining the original setting and tone, Jason Rubin wanted to follow the market as the company had been doing for years. For all we know, sticking with the old formula would have led to sales that were even more disappointing than the Precursor Legacy. Not necessarily bad sales, but probably not what Naughty Dog would have hoped for. However, we don't live in the world where that happened, and as I said in my Chain of Memories video, I find assessing a work for what it is to be far more constructive than criticizing it for what it isn't. That being said though, Jak II doesn't completely throw out everything the first game built up. As we've already discussed, early in Act 2, it's formally revealed that the game is set hundreds of years into the future. It dropped plenty of hints in the lead up to this, with precursor orbs being attainable as early as the first room of the prison escape, the Oracle being present in the water slums, a precursor temple being sequestered up in the mountains just outside Haven City's western wall, and even the old color decos being represented in subtle ways. However, this is all relatively surface-level stuff. They could all be cynically described as mere homages or lip service. But as the second act rolls on, Jak II starts to more clearly build on the story and world building that began in the first game, specifically regarding the precursors. Numerous questions were raised about them last time, with practically none of them being answered by the end. Jak II, however, expands on the precursors' mythos with some major revelations. Thousands of years ago, the precursors were wiped out by the Metalheads, originally known as the Hora-Kwan, as part of their eons-long conquest of the universe. When Jak and the others opened the Rift Gate at the start of the game, they unwittingly brought the Metalheads to their world and ignited the beast's conquest of the planet, or depending on how you interpret it, brought them back here and reignited their conquest. Humanity only survives now because of the warrior king Mar, who built Haven City and its eco-grid to power the shield wall that keeps the Metalheads at bay, while also protecting the mythical Precursor Stone hidden in his tomb. The city's throne was meant to continue to be occupied by Mar's descendants, but somewhere along the way, a coup was staged by Praxis, who usurped the throne and turned Haven City into a dystopian nightmare. As Core describes it to Jak when he escapes the fortress, the people living within Haven's walls are effectively the Baron's prisoners. The Underground was formed not only to resist Praxis's rule, but to put the true heir back on the throne, a young boy with a pendant of Mar's seal, who was found wandering the city streets by young Samos after a coup. These seemingly disparate elements neatly intersect in the game's second half. When the Dark Warrior program that gave Jak his dark powers seemed to fail, Praxis began a sweeping search of the city to find Mar's tomb and the Precursor Stone in hopes of using its power to win the war, and successfully nabs it before Jak can get close. But as young Samos learns after communing with the plants in the forest, trying to open the stone by force would unleash a burst of energy powerful enough to destroy the world. From there, the story revolves almost entirely around the Precursor Stone, with Jak, Praxis, and the Metalhead leader all gunning for it. For a story that apparently swept away everything that its predecessor had done, it sure seems interested in the titular precursors that were of such great interest the first go-around. It even gets Jak and the others more involved in uncovering these answers than the first game ever did. Exploring their ruins and temples and such in the first game was great, don't get me wrong. The atmosphere and enigmatic aura surrounding them were enticing, and the notion of answers beckoning more questions when it comes to ancient peoples of unimaginable power and influence is always intriguing, at least in my book. Jak II does give us some answers, and in the scene preceding the final battle with the Metalhead leader, we even learn a bit more information about Mar, the precursors, and the Metalheads that fuels the imagination. As it turns out, the Precursor Stone isn't merely a stone, it's an egg. The last Precursor egg. The Metalhead leader wants to feed on the precursor inside of it, as he had done to so many others before, and was trying to use his trade deal with Baron Praxis to get it. The way he describes how Mar hid the stone implies that Mar was a time traveler who may have known the precursors or perhaps was a precursor himself, as this was not the only egg he had. It's such a small tidbit and is given such little attention in the moment, but we already know that time travel is a thing that exists. The beast even has the same kind of rift gate from the game's opening open and floating here in his den. And of course, Mar did deliberately try and hide the stone from the Metalheads. We know he knew about and fought against them because he built a massive cannon outside their nest that's powerful enough to pierce the outer wall when charged up by the Precursor Stone, but he unfortunately died before he could use it. It takes a while for the story to get to it, but by the end, it hinges almost completely on elements of the world that were established in the Precursor Legacy. If you were to skip that game and jump straight into Jak II, the significance of all of this would be mostly lost. The way so much of it unfolds in the lead up to this is also handled with a deft hand. Just about every piece of the Metalheads and Praxis's plots are gradually set up and paid off in ways that respect the player's intelligence, making sure to bring them up but only calling so much attention to them. The shield wall was mentioned by Vin during the first act, and it keeps the Metalheads out of the city, but the tanker incident in the bazaar during Act 2 shows that it isn't foolproof. Around the same time, Crew has Jak retrieve a ruby key from the statue of Mar he had tried to smuggle through the sewers, and is so insistent on having it that he leaves his saloon to ask Jak for it directly at the stadium when he initially doesn't bring it back.
Crew? I must have forgotten.
Right.
These two things dovetail together near the end of Act 3. Before Crew dies in an explosion of his own making, he taunts Jak and Daxter about how he already sold out the entire city. Sure enough, he had sent Sig down to the Underport to unlock a secret passage with the ruby key, and hordes of metalheads were waiting on the other side. At the same time, the shield wall is sabotaged from within, allowing the metalheads to pour in and attack the city, with Vin and Sig being among the first casualties of their onslaught. The whole city is on high alert as the Crimson Guard work tirelessly to combat the Metalhead menace, completely ignoring anything you do in the meantime, so you know the situation has gone completely sideways. You can't even do any side missions at this point because of the chaos. As far as how the shield wall was compromised...
Core, what's going on?
I'm sure you know. Deep down in your darkest nightmares. We've met before, remember?
That was Core's doing, because he was, in actuality, the Metalhead leader in disguise all along. He was playing everyone, pushing the underground via Jak to disrupt Praxis's plans at every turn to weaken the Baron's forces, which in turn would justify launching more aggressive attacks on the city when the promised amounts of eco weren't delivered, and would use whatever information our heroes learned about the Baron's plans to his advantage. The foreshadowing is subtle, but it's there. His design is the biggest giveaway, but the way that he talks about the Metalheads, Onin being incredibly suspicious of him, and the way he talks about finally holding the Precursor Stone are just some moments that allude to his true identity. It helps that the only two times you actually see his true form before the reveal are during the intro and when his head appears as a hologram during a meeting with Praxis at the end of Act 1. You're only given brief looks at him, but they're enough to potentially give you pause whenever Core says or does something dubious if you've been paying attention.
Jak II's story is not only strong, but carefully considered. There are a lot of little bits and details that bolster the bigger moments that come up later. Saving lurkers from the slave trade, which itself is an interesting follow-up on their roles in the first game, ingratiates Jak and Daxter to their former enemies, leading to them helping to transport the Rift Rider to the Metalhead nest as thanks. Sig's endearing personality makes it all the more upsetting when that Metalpede gets the jump on him. Vin's paranoia over metalheads turned out to be more than warranted, as he's one of the first to be torn to shreds when the shield wall goes down. Torn's dedication to the Underground and their cause makes it hurt that much more when he sells you out at Mars' tomb, but knowing that he did it because Praxis threatened to kill Ashlyn for leaking intel is what humanizes him. And of course, there's all the little hints towards Core's true identity, which are handled incredibly well. As strong as the story is, however, it does have its weak spots, most of which lie in how it's told. Just as there are parts of this story that come together brilliantly, there are others which feel a bit undercooked. For example, the last two things Kira needs for the Rift Rider are the Heart of Mar Gem and an artifact called the Time Map. The former has a solid setup. The Men crew has Jak escort through the sewers to the statue, blow it up to find the gem inside, and bring it to old Tons of Fun, and our heroes get it back when they turn in their resignation at the weapons factory. The Time Map, however, just sort of appears. Tess saw crew hide it in the whack-a-mole machine at the bar before going to the lab, and it pops out after Daxter gets a high score, but how he got it and where it came from are never mentioned. The closest thing to an explanation you get is much earlier in the game, all the way back in the first act, when crew explains that Wastelanders find objects and artifacts of value and interest outside the city walls. Sig is a Wastelander, so the implication is that he probably found it at some point, but it's never alluded to one way or the other. This doesn't break the story or anything, but it definitely feels like a last-minute rewrite. On a similar wavelength is something of a missed opportunity, but it feels more like a setup without any payoff. Before the Class 3 race, Jak tells Kira that they found Samos, but can't bring himself to tell her that it's not the same Samos that came with them to the future. He just tells her,
"You need to go see him."
That's all well and good. It maintains the focus of the scene while keeping the door open for Kira to learn about and meet young Samos later. But that never happens. They never mention or acknowledge each other even when they're in the same scenes together towards the end of the story. Again, it feels like a deliberate setup with absolutely zero payoff. But then there's the whole thing with Jak slowly dying from the dark ego inside of him. It feels like it should be a bigger part of the story, but that information only comes from the Baron's broadcasts, which are played randomly as you pass by these little totems, and the Oracle in the water slums, which you never have to visit, and Jak doesn't react to nor mention it. Because this information is technically missable, and gathering skull gems for dark powers not only could be done at any point in the story, but also isn't required, writing this particular part of Jak's plight into the story proper may have proven difficult. They could have put the information into a cutscene somewhere, of course, and perhaps that was intended at some point. Maybe the team wanted to retain some aspect of the first game's collectathon nature without it being forced, but still rewarding, resulting in what we got with the Oracle and the Dark Powers. And because you could visit the Oracle anytime or not at all, adding story beats focused on Jak's degradation could have conflicted with how much the player engaged with the gem collecting and unlocking new powers. It didn't have to be this way. They could have worked out how to have their cake and eat it too. But as it is, the lasting effect of the experiment being that Jak will eventually die feels like an afterthought with little to no bearing on the story. Sure, he transforms willingly before the fight with Metalcore, which you can argue is indicative of him gaining control of his powers, but that reading rings a bit hollow when you consider that the last time he definitely, absolutely did transform, in terms of the narrative, was after breaking out of prison at the start of the story. Solid bookends, yeah, but narratively, it doesn't really feel earned. And then there's the idea of Jak being a hero of the people. Errol says he's the talk of the town, that he gives people hope, but we never really see or even feel that. The audience cheering in the stadium during the races could just be cheering for the sport, or for Errol in the case of the championship. They cheer when Jak wins the last race, but outside the stadium they completely ignore him unless he starts causing a ruckus, at which point they run scared and call for the guards. It's a classic case of telling rather than showing, and it contributes to the issue of Haven City itself feeling empty and devoid of life, despite being heavily populated. There are also parts of the story's structure that are questionable. During Act 1, you learn about the elevator in one of the palace's support towers from Kira, but power needs to be restored to it. You can learn this before rescuing Vin at the strip mine, which is fine, but in order to start the mission to hit the switches to activate the elevator, you have to finish every other mission in the first act, save for collecting money bags for crew and getting the artifacts at the Mountain Temple. You could save the race to the stadium and the jetboard challenge for last, which would mean that learning about the elevator could organically lead into asking Vin about it, but that's entirely optional and you'd have to go out of your way to do it, not to mention have the clairvoyance to do it in the first place. When you finish the Blaster course, you could either go to Crew or Torn, with the former being more appealing since he's basically right down the street, versus needing to take a drive across town. But Crew gives you the mission to go to the stadium, so doing this first would leave a massive gap between learning about the elevator and actually using it. What's more is that, after helping Vin with the drill platform, he disappears until you've gone back to Torn and met Ashlyn at the pumping station, and even if you did play these missions in such an order that the info Kira gives you could immediately precede turning on the power and going up to the palace, once you finish your business there, you'd still have a few Act 1 missions to finish before starting Act 2, which opens with Torn tearing into Jak and Daxter for infiltrating the palace without authorization, and the consequences thereof. Again, this isn't necessarily bad, but the pacing here is wonky in a way that the rest of the game doesn't suffer from, and I may know why that is, though you're gonna want to stick with me here. While perusing the Jak and Daxter subreddits, I found a post asking what Jak was planning to do at the palace at the end of Act 1, and someone posted a comment to it talking about how Sam Thompson, one of Jak 2's producers from Sony Computer Entertainment, said that the game's story was more or less cobbled together as dialogue was being recorded. This being news to me, I asked where they got this information, and they shared a screenshot of a Facebook message from Thompson himself. While working on this video, I did verify that Thompson did indeed use that as his profile picture until July 2024. Of course, this on its own isn't definitive proof that this person shared actual correspondence with Thompson, but Dan Arey, the game's writer and creative director of the series, sort of corroborated this in his own post-mortem of the game that he wrote for the January 2004 issue of Game Developer magazine.
This tight coupling between game and story required specifics in the dialogue that locked down play elements to an uncomfortable degree. As we recorded and animated the scenes, it became increasingly difficult to eliminate or adjust gameplay because of these links. To combat this, we kept the story as flexible as possible without breaking the cause and effect chain, by having a few alternate recordings for vital plot and character revelations attached to a variety of backup gameplay tasks. We also built in what we called standalone levels, which, if needed, we could excise from the game and the schedule, without greatly affecting the story experience.
Whether or not you find this commenter's claims to be credible, to be honest, I'm not quite 100% about it myself, the way that Jak 2's story and missions are structured and paced out are just loose enough for it to be believable. There are a ton of missions with wider narrative ramifications which could theoretically be put almost anywhere without hurting the main sequence of events. The points where you're given a choice between a handful of them to do are emblematic of this, but the main story beats are where they need to be, and the missions themselves are paced out in such a way to keep the gameplay interesting and engaging, rather than repetitive. On a macro scale, the pacing is strong, especially from the Class 1 race onward. From there out, it's nothing but forward momentum. The construction site deserves particular mention, as while it's only a single cutscene, it's a pretty important one. Metalcore is revealed, he kills Baron Praxis, Daxter deactivates a second Piercer Bomb, and unlatches the Precursor Stone before you charge off to face Core in one last battle. While some may be disappointed that we don't put the Baron in an early grave personally, I personally don't mind it too much. A bit anticlimactic, sure, but we are far past usurping the Baron by this point. However, while Jak has come a long way to understanding this, it isn't until he confronts Metalcore at the Nest that he truly learns just how far he's actually come, and how deeply important he is in all of this. And it's when this final truth is revealed that Jak II's strongest and most pervasive themes fully come into focus. As you can plainly see, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Jak II. However, as far as I've seen, the conversation tends to exist in a vacuum, largely removed from the context of its original release in 2003. This isn't always the case. On occasion, I do see someone bring up the idea that Jak II was a direct critique of the George W. Bush administration and the Iraq War. It's not difficult to see why such a comparison would be drawn. Baron Praxis rose to power through illegitimate means, similar to how many felt and still feel about how Bush won the 2000 election. Jak's torture in prison could be seen as a call-out of the enhanced interrogation techniques used on prisoners in the fallout of September 11th. You could view the Baron's plan to blow up the Metalhead nest with the Precursor Stone as a send-up of the shock and awe strategy of the US military at the time. The destruction of Deadtown by the Metalheads could be seen as this world's equivalent to 9/11, with how many people died and how much was destroyed. There are probably even more parallels you could draw, but I think you get the idea. While I certainly think there's merit to this reading of Jak II's story, I highly doubt that it was intentional. The bones of the game's story were basically set in stone by the end of 2002, before the US began bombing Iraq or officially declared war. While it was known that same year that torture was absolutely on the table for the Bush administration, details of the methods the CIA were using wouldn't be known to the public until sometime after Jak II's release. And if we follow this reading to its logical conclusion, then it would basically equate the Metalheads, a race of monstrous, conquering beasts, to the people of Iraq, which, yeah, no, I'm not into dehumanizing an entire group of people. Moreover, as far as I've been able to find, nobody who worked on the game has ever so much as alluded to any of these parallels being intentional, or even acknowledged them. That doesn't mean there's nothing there. Subconscious influence is absolutely a thing that happens to those in artistic fields, but it is applicable, a word I think a lot of people resistant to these type of readings really need to understand and learn how to apply when it comes to media criticism. No, the context I'm talking about is much more narrow than contemporary geopolitics. By the time Jak was properly ushered into the world, it wasn't the same one he started in anymore. In practically an instant, he went from fitting in to being out of place. Over the course of 2 years, he was dramatically changed, forced to become a drastically different person to have a chance of survival, but in the process, he lost a part of himself. It wasn't clear whether he was even the same person anymore, to himself or those who knew him just 2 years ago. I'm not talking about Jak the character. I'm talking about Jak the video game. Just as Grand Theft Auto 3 is as far removed from Super Mario 64 as you can get, the same can be said for Haven City and Sandover Village. You can't plop Mario into Liberty City and expect everything to just work out on its own. To make him fit for the new setting, you have to adapt him to it, not the other way around. But in doing so, he's not going to be the same character anymore. This is what happened to Jak. To court the mass market that Naughty Dog was aiming for, they had to reinvent the character. They gave a narrative justification for it, and did retain his most important aspects, but even then, he's no longer the same. This is obviously part of the text, but it's really driven home when Jak faces down Metal Core and sees that he's holding the kid hostage. He has the pure gift that would allow him to open the Precursor Stone and release the Precursor within it so that the metal monster can devour it like he had so many others. The kid's gift is the same affinity for Precursor artifacts that Jak had in the first game, because the boy is Jak. And thanks to the Baron's experiments, because of the changes he was forced to undergo to survive in this new world, he no longer has that gift. The story of Jak II is about more than just war, revenge, and dystopia, more than Jak learning who he is now. Jak II, intentionally or not, is about its own place in a rapidly changing video game market, learning how to hold on to however much of yourself you can while adapting to a world that is actively hostile towards you. It's why we protect the kid, the young Jak, throughout the story. He represents the earnest and uncynical nature of the first game, as well as Jack's own lost innocence, an innocence which was unfortunately a hindrance to him and to the survival and success of the series. Through this lens, the Metalheads can be looked at as a metaphor for the tidal wave of mature games that was starting to take over the market, gobbling up all of the attention and interest of players to the detriment of any lighter fare, i.e. the Precursors and young Jack. Jack wants to protect that innocence that they represent, but in the end he knows he has to let it all go. That part of him belongs in the past, which is where the young Samos takes the kid after Metalcore is defeated once and for all. Over time, that boy will become best friends with a loudmouth kid with orange hair, develop a mutual crush on the sage's daughter, save the world from a pair of wicked siblings, find the very same Rift Rider he came there on, and use it to come back to where his journey started, to save the world all over again, just like his future self. Jack could have gone back to his old life. The opportunity was right in front of him, and Ashlyn even told him that it's what he should do. But he doesn't belong in that world anymore, not just because of the hero's journey aspect of the story, where his experiences have changed him so much that home doesn't feel like home anymore, but because Jack, the fictional character, no longer makes sense in that setting, just like how Tommy Vercetti doesn't make sense in the Mushroom Kingdom. But he's okay with that. He's learned that anywhere you call home is worth fighting for, and despite all the pain and anguish and trauma he suffered here in Haven City, it's his true home, even if his younger self won't remember that. Before young Samos takes the kid back to the past, though, he does end up doing what Core so desperately wanted.
Oh man, a precursor.
It is finished. Our ancient enemy is no more. Take hope, brave one. The terrible darkness inside you is now balanced by a glorious light. We will meet again.
After some goodbyes and sound advice to his younger self, Jack, Daxter, Samos, and Kira watch the kid and young Samos go through the portal back to the world that they left behind.
Thanks, Samos. Without you...
It's funny. The boy won't remember any of this.
No. I do remember the light.
While the deaths of both Praxis and Core are cause for celebration, with Daxter throwing a party at the newly rebranded Naughty Otzel Saloon, the ending still has this tinge of melancholy. Jack is beside himself about the whole situation. He not only misses the kid, but the innocence he had back then.
Better times, huh?
But whether he knows it or not, that innocence, the playfulness of the mascot platformer, never actually left him. Jak II may have taken a dark turn, but it never forgot its roots. They've just been moved to different soil. The game doesn't always take itself seriously, and it's self-aware enough not to go full grimdark. People still died, of course. Vin was torn to shreds by metalheads, Crew was caught in his own explosion, and countless civilians died. Sig survived, though, because he was just way too cool and likable to leave dead, and I'm okay with that. With those dark forces that had engulfed Jack's world now destroyed, the healing process can truly begin. The future is looking bright for all of them. Jak II did a terrific job at threading the needle between mature, complex storytelling and being a fun action platformer. It's not the most complex story, nor the most mature, but it respects players' intelligence without asking them to do much more than simply pay attention when there's a cutscene. I have fond memories of renting this game from Blockbuster as a kid. I had never heard of Grand Theft Auto before, but the open city fascinated me. Granted, I didn't know what I was doing and never got very far during the rental period, but the opening cutscene, escaping from the fortress, transforming into Dark Jack, and wreaking havoc in the slums were all experiences that ingrained themselves into my head for decades to come. I still remember unwrapping it at Christmas the following year along with the Brady Games strategy guide, and using that to learn whatever I could about the parts of the story I couldn't get to yet, imagining how these cutscenes played out years before I was finally able to beat the game myself. I could give a comprehensive list of every mission that stalled my progress growing up, and the mere mention of some of them, like the escape from the water slums, would trigger a Vietnam flashback for a lot of you. But these days, that's basically the only one that gives me any major trouble. I understand that the aesthetic and tonal shift can seem off-putting if you've only played the first game and really enjoyed it, but I genuinely believe you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you don't give it an honest shot. That's not just with the benefit of over 20 years of reflection and hindsight either, as praise for Jak II has been easy to find, ever since it first released, all the way back in 2003.
This is the weapon Jak uses to defeat the enemies here. Would you like to check it out? Uh-oh, here comes the Crimson Guard! Is he part of the tour? No, he's not part of the tour.
This world is better left to Jak, rated T for T. Let's go take care of business.
As it began making its way to store shelves in North America on October 14, 2003, Jak II was met with glowing critical reception, much like its predecessor. The game was praised for not just prioritizing its story, but for having one that was genuinely gripping, with Hollywood-caliber presentation and top-notch visuals, as well as its healthy variety of game mechanics that kept the experience fresh for the duration of a playthrough. Nearly every review, however, would draw comparisons between it and Grand Theft Auto 3, among several other games.
Name a successful game. You can spot it living inside Jak II. Ratchet and Clank, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, Mario, Rainbow Six, Panzer Dragoon, Banjo-Kazooie, Final Fantasy VII, The Legend of Zelda? They're all there, somewhere, tied together in the underground sewer network of Jak's dirty city. But this is hardly a criticism, it's actually Jak II's biggest strength. It uses 3D platformer as a loose foundation for a towering monument to a million great gameplay ideas. Naughty Dog, it would seem, has been paying attention the last couple of years.
Though whether or not this was a positive varied among critics.
If you turned into a late-night infomercial for Jak II, the OxyClean spokesman would be screaming, "Throw out those messy PS2 games like GTA Vice City, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Wipeout Fusion, and Ratchet and Clank. Jak II has it all." Seriously, Jak II throws the entire contents of gaming's pantry into the pot to attempt to create some kind of genre-obliterating super game. The resulting mix definitely has something for everybody, but the recipe could use a little revision.
This, however, would be far from the only major criticism levied against it. While Haven City was appreciated as a setting, the large size, lack of things to do within its walls, and amount of time spent traveling back and forth between missions were all notable sore spots. But the one thing that Jak II got more flack for than anything else was its difficulty. Aggressive swarms of enemies, a lack of checkpoints, and unexpected difficulty spikes were all noted from various critics. While some felt that this made the game that much more satisfying whenever you did overcome those challenges, others just saw it as poor design. And yet these points didn't detract all that much from review scores. Many outlets gave Jak II similar, if not slightly higher ratings than the first game. Despite his criticisms echoing those of his contemporaries, PSM's Adam Pawlaka would not only score it higher than Randy Nelson had for the Precursor Legacy, but would award it a perfect 10 out of 10, calling it the best platformer not just on the PlayStation 2, but the best platformer anywhere. But such high praise was not universal. While EGM's Chris Johnston and Joe Fielder both gave the game an 8.5, Shane Bettenhausen was the odd man out of the review crew, deeming it a 7.5 for being pretty to look at, but also derivative and often frustrating. The most scathing review, surprisingly, came from Gary Steinman at the official US PlayStation magazine, who was frustrated not just by the aforementioned difficulty, but by the sinking feeling that Jak II fell short of being truly spectacular based on fleeting moments where he felt every aspect of its design come together in perfect harmony. Even then, he still awarded it a 3.5 out of 5. Initial sales for Jak II were strong, becoming the second best-selling game of October 2003 in the United States, only falling behind NBA Live 2004, while outselling Tony Hawk's Underground, Beautiful Joe, SSX3, and Castlevania Lament of Innocence, among others, that month. Within 6 months, it would sell over 1.6 million units globally, which was comparable to the first Jak and Daxter, earning it a greatest hits label as well. This success would extend beyond sales and review scores, however, as Jak II would see 6 nominations at the 2004 DICE Awards, including Outstanding Achievements in Animation, Gameplay Engineering, and Platform Action Adventure Game of the Year. Compare this to the measly 2 nominations the original Jak and Daxter received in 2002, which it lost out to Halo and Grand Theft Auto 3, and it seemed that Naughty Dog's gamble was paying off. They had successfully parlayed Jak and Daxter from being just another collectathon into a new benchmark for the action platformer. But it wasn't the only game raising that particular bar that holiday season. Ratchet and Clank Going Commando would release only a month after Jak II, and its critical reception was more consistently glowing than Naughty Dog's sequel. Game Informer's Andrew Reiner would give it a 9.5. Gary Steinman, who was especially critical of Jak II, awarded Going Commando a perfect 5, and similar scores would come from EGM's review crew. Its sales by spring 2004 were comparable to Jak II's, and it would even be nominated in 7 categories at the DICE Awards that year, going head-to-head with Jak II in Animation, Art Direction, Visual Engineering, and Platform Action Game of the Year. But it would also be in the running for Character or Story Development, Console Game of the Year, and Overall Game of the Year, though the 2 games would lose out in most of these categories to Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. One of the biggest indicators of Ratchet and Clank overtaking Jak was the former's continued success, and the latter's depreciation, in Japan. Going Commando didn't perform as strongly as its predecessor in the territory, but it managed to sell over 200,000 units in 7 weeks before falling out of the top 30. Jak II, on the other hand, only sold a paltry 8,500 copies the week of its release in March 2004, coming in at number 17, before dropping out of the charts altogether. While Going Commando was the 153rd best-selling game in Japan in 2004, Jak II didn't even make the top 500. It's not hard to understand why Jak II failed in Japan. Aesthetically, it was far removed from what the Japanese found appealing about the original, and it wasn't just Japan that rejected it. There were, and still are, many fans of the Precursor Legacy who lament that the series went in this direction, rather than build on the more traditional foundations of its predecessor, especially considering that Jak II allegedly didn't sell as well. I say allegedly because the only reported sales data I could dig up was that 1.6 million figure that was reported all the way back in 2004. As far as I can tell, neither Sony nor Naughty Dog have publicly updated that number. And before anyone brings it up, no, I am not counting VG charts because their sourcing and methodology are frustratingly opaque. That being said, even without further official updates on the game's sales, I wouldn't be surprised if Jak II crossed the 2 million mark, if not a bit more, since its greatest hits reissue. But even if that were the case, it would still pale in comparison to the 4.2 million copies the first game had sold by January 2008, as well as the near 3 million units Going Commando had sold by the end of 2007. But assuming that those confirmed 1.6 million copies were sold at an average price of $40 USD, to account for sales and discounts, the game would have generated about $64 million in revenue. Weigh that against its $15 million budget and marketing costs, and Jak II definitely made tens of millions of dollars in profit, even before becoming a greatest hits title. So it was by no means a failure, even if it did once again fall short commercially. Even with that 1.6 million figure, Jak II would still be the 98th best-selling game on the PlayStation 2, which, in a library of thousands of games, is still very respectable, even if it is over 70 places behind the first game. All of this feeds into the modern legacy of not just Jak II, but of the series at large. The dramatic shift in tone and adoption of hallmarks from the Grand Theft Auto series led to the perception that Naughty Dog didn't know what they wanted the series to be. This notion has followed it ever since, even among some players who did give the series a chance past its initial installment. There is credence to this idea, but it's something that goes beyond just Jak II, so we'll revisit it in a later video. That's only one of the 2 major components of this particular game's legacy, however. The other is its difficulty. It was lambasted for being exceptionally hard back in 2003, and it continues to be derided for it in 2025. A casual search for lists of the hardest games on the PS2 will yield a healthy number of results, with Jak II nestled alongside games like the original release of Devil May Cry 3 and Shinobi. Even Josh Scher agrees with the sentiment that the difficulty was way too high. Yet despite this, it's not uncommon to see it considered one of the best games on the PlayStation 2, and its grimier, edgier sensibilities are looked at as an encapsulation of that particular era of video games, for better or for worse. It's one part classic, another part historical artifact in a sense, like some strange, malformed Rosetta Stone. Contemporary critics were right on the ball in saying that Jak II has a little bit of everything that was popular in the preceding 5 years or so, and while at the time that could have been seen as either an ingenious blending of genres or a bad stew, today it can be used to give those who didn't grow up at the time an idea of where the games industry was. While this may seem like a recipe for a game that is far too of its time to garner any continued interest, you would be very wrong to think that. Like its predecessor, Jak II has seen a handful of ports and re-releases over the years, and just like the first game, pretty much all of them are a reasonable way to play it, aside from the Vita version. The PS3 version once again sports the ability to invert your camera, which wasn't in the original, whereas the PS4 version is straight emulation, but despite what fans would probably tell you, it's perfectly fine. And the Collector's Edition from Limited Run Games doesn't fetch nearly as high a price as the first games, though with the average listing ranging between $200 and $300, it's still a bit rich for my blood. But once again, the best version available today is easily OpenGoal, the open-source fan-made decompilation. Like last time, there's a proper widescreen mode, high-resolution support, and new secrets. At the time of writing, though, it is still in beta, but aside from a minor glitch where the sewer escort mission stopped playing dialogue or progressing past a certain point, which was remedied by a reset, and hero mode not unlocking in the secrets menu, I didn't have any issues during my playthrough. Just rip your PS2 disc and let it do its thing. This, however, would not be the end of Jak's story. Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin were still committed to a third game before they could leave Naughty Dog behind. And like the second game, the end of the trilogy would see another radical change in locale, as Jak would be exiled from Haven City and forced to survive in the desert wasteland beyond its walls.
Hey there, Frankie Bits here. I got another exciting product for you today. It's gonna be better than your mama's marinara. Have you ever been wanting to play your sweet PlayStation 2 and you say, gee, Frankie Bits, there's too many amazing games to play? Common problem, I know. The good folk at Naughty Dog have a perfect solution for you. Jak II. Throw away all of those messy PS2 games like GTA Vice City, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Wipeout Fusion, and Ratchet and Clank. Jak II has it all! Big open world! So huge! Carjacking! Vroom vroom! Aggressive police! Only in America! 4 unique guns! Pew 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 pew! Hoverboarding! Tubular! Drunk weasels! funny. Hoverbike racing. Don't crash. Roadkill. HHS approved. Acrophobia. Don't look down. Excessive difficulty. I need help. The existential threat of losing your innocence to a hostile world with which is only to exploit you for the benefit of those in charge. And Edge! I got myself on it! Featuring the voice talents of my cousin Benny, Little Hulk, Green Lantern, Senator Bobby, Lex Luthor, and more! Jak II combines all of the greatest things from games from the past few years and turns them into a genre-obliterating super game! You won't need to buy another game for years! And at the low price of $49.99, Jak II's an absolute bargain! I'm so confident that you're gonna love this game that if you order now, I'm gonna get you a second copy of the game for free! I'll even throw another 20% off! That's right! 2 copies of Jak II for only $39.99 plus shipping and handling. You can't beat that deal! Gabagool? More like not a fool! You wanna run, you wanna jump, you wanna shoot, you wanna ride, Jak II is gonna knock your pants off, put them back on, send you home and have a good night. Here's how to order.
To order Jak II, call the toll-free number on screen now. Order in the next 10 minutes to guarantee your free second copy at a reduced price of $39.99 plus shipping and handling. Supplies are limited. Jak II is only playable on the Sony PlayStation 2 computer entertainment system and is rated T for comic mischief, mild language, mild violence, and suggestive themes. Jak II may not be suitable for players under 13 years of age. Frankie Bitts is not responsible for children using coarse language after playing Jak II, but he will take responsibility if your peers find you more attractive. Order now.